Grüß, willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 27 of my Star Trek, the original series, timeline series of analysis videos. In this video I'll discuss what we know about Vulcan, that's the planet, and the people on it, the Vulcans. Of all the aliens in Star Trek, we possess the most information about the Vulcans, and I have to admit, even so, it's pretty minimal. As is my normal practice, let's look at all the references in the original series scripts and attempt to create a coherent view of this enigmatic people. In the episode The Man Trap, we discovered that Vulcan does not have a moon. In the episode Operation Annihilate, we learn the sun of Vulcan is very bright. Perhaps it's a semi-desert planet, closer to its sun than, let's say, Earth is. In the episode The Immunity Syndrome, we discovered that within Vulcan collective memory, they have known of no conqueror. Perhaps no one has ever conquered Vulcan from another planet. In the episode The Savage Curtain, the Vulcans use a boomerang style of weapon, probably used in ancient times, as it's a low-tech weapon. Nonetheless, it's highly effective at killing its target. In the episode Amok Time, we learned the Vulcans in the past were very violent and would kill to win a mate. The Vulcans were the ultimate alpha male. In the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, we learn a Vulcan almost destroyed itself before it adopted its logical pacifism. While the Vulcans are pacifists, I have to assume this is tempered by logic, so they understand sometimes fighting and violence is required. Otherwise, why man a starship, which is effectively a military vessel? The Vulcans also have a technique which is used for execution, the Tal Shaya, so much for an aversion to violence. In the episode The Savage Curtain, we discover Surak is the father of Vulcan, obviously a pacifist, and who lived during the 4th century, Earth century. While not contained in the episode, Memory Alpha claims Surak lived in the 4th century, which I have to assume is an Earth century. This is sometimes between 300 and 399 AD. As Vulcans could live for a long time, I can assume he was born in 300 AD and possibly lived throughout the entire century. However, I strongly suspect that this may not be the case in this time period. That is, Vulcans didn't actually live a long time during this period. On the other hand, I also strongly suspect Surak may have been one of the first Vulcans to be able to live for over a century. In the episode Amok Time, we learn Spock's family held its land for over 2,000 years, which takes us back to 264 AD. He must have come from an important long-lived family. This was even before Surak was born, which occurred between 300 and 399 AD. So this must be a truly old family reaching back into the times of war and violence on Vulcan. In the episode Balance of Terror, and the episode The Enterprise Incident, we learn the Romulans are an offshoot of the Vulcans. A good question to ask is, when did the Romulans actually leave Vulcan? I would assume it would have occurred during the period of war in order to allow all records of that race or journey to be lost, basically in the time of Surak or just before. If the Romulans had a primitive space drive, which took many years to arrive at Romulus, they could have arrived there in, let's say, 400 AD. This gives the Romulans about 1600 years to colonize and populate their primary planet and then start expanding into space, meeting the Terrans or human expansion, which, of course, results in war. While this theory is a stretch, in order to work I have to assume the lifespan of the Romulans was less than those of the Vulcans, at least in the time of Kirk. Perhaps the long travel in radiation-filled space affected their lifespan, or perhaps when they left, the Vulcans did not really live that long. To populate Romulus in 1600 years would take a much shorter lifespan, unless Romulan women acted as baby machines, which I seriously doubt they would. While the Vulcans and Romulans are biologically very similar, there are some biological differences. I suspect the Romulans lack the physical strength and stamina of the Vulcans. Perhaps Vulcans' strength and stamina is related to their mental discipline, something the Romulans lack. We learn in the episode Journey to Babel, the Vulcans form a V with their fingers as a sign of greeting or farewell. I assume McCoy calls it a Vulcan salute. In the episode Errant to Mercy, we learn Vulcan traders are not uncommon, or they are common. I suspect it was Vulcan traders who first made contact with Earth, although in retrospect I think it's more likely the Vulcans were monitoring Earth and pretended they were traders. This sequence of events is a bit of a guess, but in order to make the movie First Contact possible, the following sequence of events could have occurred. Because the Botany Bay is launched into interstellar space, a Vulcan ship notices it, backtracks it to its origin, and makes first contact with Earth. This could have been later than 1997, but 1997 is the earliest probable date of Vulcan-Earth first contact. We know that Vulcan traders are common, so the first contact may have been Vulcan traders. In this scenario, the Vulcans are using impulse drive. On the other hand, it's also quite possible that it could be similar to the Enterprise episode Carbon Creek, where the Vulcans are actually monitoring Earth, which is probably the more likely scenario than a random encounter by Vulcan traders and a first interstellar ship from Earth. In the episode Metamorphosis, Cochrane recognises a Vulcan, so he must have been aware of them when he disappeared in 2117. In the episode The Immunity Syndrome, we discover the Vulcans man one of the 12 main starships of the Federation, the Intrepid. They were all unfortunately killed in this particular episode. In the episode Journey to Babel, we learn the Vulcans have a Vulcan Space Academy, which is considered more important than entering Starfleet, at least according to the Vulcans. Let's try and make sense of all these script references and facts. In summary, we know Vulcan has no moon and its sun is very bright, requiring the Vulcans to evolve in a manner which allows them to protect their eyes in extreme situations. I suppose a bright sun could mean the planet is hot and semi-desert, which seems to be the assumption subsequent series use, and even in the episode Amok Time, the planet looks rather desert and dry, or desert-like and dry. My wild guess is the climate and terrain is similar to that of Israel, or perhaps the Sinai. It's possible the harsh environment has created a very robust race. Possibly part of the strength of the Vulcan comes from this harsh environment. However, I doubt a race could evolve in this manner and that a harsh environment would give it super strength. After all, the Bedouins do not possess super strength. So I don't feel the harsh climate was the cause of Vulcan's strength and stamina. We know early Vulcans were a very violent people, apparently killing in order to obtain a mate being the most extreme example of this violence. A better example, or another example, is the use of their boomerang-like weapon in their early historical period, which is a rather effective killing device. We can assume that without logic, the Vulcans may be a tad more emotional and violent than humans. Perhaps the Romulans are a better view of what these early Vulcans were actually like. On the other hand, the Vulcans must have been able to develop technology while in this violent state of emotional turmoil, as the Romulans must have been able to get away in interstellar craft. During the period the Vulcans were almost destroying themselves. Perhaps there were two main alliances which almost destroyed each other in warfare, forcing the Vulcans to adopt their pacifism and logic. For a race to change so dramatically, I expect they must have come very close to obliterating their civilization. Perhaps this occurred back in 300-399 AD. If this theory is correct, the Romulans would have needed to get away first, while their civilization, that is the Vulcan civilization, possessed the technology in order for the Romulans to do so. The other alternative is the Romulans left because they refused to adopt the logical philosophy of Sarek. But in order to create the Romulan Star Empire, they needed as much time as possible in order to do so. So they needed, or the starting of it, or them leaving Vulcan, needed to occur as early as possible. I suspect they left before it got so bad that Sarek had to step in with such a demanding philosophy. So I don't think this theory is viable. Once the Vulcans adopted their logic pacifist philosophy, they quickly rebuilt their civilization and went out to develop their loose trading association or network. I'm uncertain why they did this. We know the Vulcans had never been conquered by any race in living memory, so external threat was probably not the primary reason. Perhaps it's a result of the trauma of almost destroying their own civilization and the knowledge of that there are other races out there. Perhaps it was a desire to spread their philosophy. Perhaps it was due to their logic. They knew eventually a threat would arise, so better be proactive and try and find it before it found it. The final possible, and I think most likely reason, is the pinnacle of their societies seemed to be the Vulcan Science Academy, which could be the reason why they went into space to explore. They were seeking knowledge, and perhaps coming as traders gave them more access to other alien societies, which allowed them to gather that knowledge. This is a long shot, but it's probably the most logical reason for them to go out there and explore. Let's now look at the Vulcan race and their unique biological characteristics. In the episode The Cloud Minders, we learned the Vulcans' mating cycle is 7 years. This is a long time between bonking. Also in the episode Amok Time, we learned that when the Vulcans are in heat, they become highly emotional and violent, and if they cannot mate, will die or may die. I find this particular reference from the Naked Time rather disturbing, but according to Nurse Chapel, the men from Vulcan treat their women strangely. At least, people say that. But you're part human too. I know you don't. You couldn't hurt me, would you? I have no idea what is going on here and prefer to just say the Vulcan men may get a little bit rough when in heat. So much for the mating habits of the Vulcans, which in the hypersex world of Star Trek I suppose I had no choice but to discover. We also learn very early in the TV series that the Vulcans control their emotion. This is clearly stated in the episodes Mudd's Woman. In the episode Court Martial, we learn the Vulcans are governed by logic and Vulcanians do not speculate. In the episode Dagger of the Mind, we learn the Vulcans can probe another person's mind. This is also mentioned in several more episodes, which is listed in the top right corner of the screen. In the episode Errant of Mercy, we discover Vulcans can create a shield against someone else probing their mind. This allowed Spock to protect himself from the Klingon mind probe device. In the episode A Taste of Armageddon, we learn the Vulcans have limited telepathic abilities over some distance. In the episode Operation Annihilate, we learn the Vulcans have significant self-control and can disregard pain, even extreme pain. Well, I'm uncertain if this is correct, and actually I'm uncertain what it actually means, but in the episode The Menagerie, we learn the Vulcans cannot be disloyal. In the episode The Deadly Years, a Vulcan is still robust when he is 100, or she is 100, but has slowed down to some minimal extent. Perhaps this is similar to a human at 50, if not even earlier. In the episode Journey to Babel, we learn Sarek is 102 years old, which means he was born shortly after the Federation was formed in 2161, and just before the SS Archon was destroyed at Beta 3. Sarek is retiring at an unusually young age for a Vulcan to retire. According to Memory Alpha, Sarek, father of Spock, was born in 2165. However, I'll be honest, I still go with the 2163, because the difference of 2 years is based on whether or not you believe the Kirk mission or the episodes start in year 1 or year 3, and I believe it starts in year 1. Also in the episode Journey to Babel, we learn the Vulcans have significant greater stamina than humans. This is also raised in a number of other episodes. Also in the episode Journey to Babel, the Vulcans can also use their minds to force heal part of their bodies, if they are conscious and able to do so physically. In the episode The Paradise Syndrome, we learn the Vulcans can, if required, go without sleep for weeks, but there is an impact on their health. While Vulcan strength and stamina is greater than humans, it is dependent on their brains. That is at least according to McCoy in the episode Spock's Brain. Spock's body is more dependent on that tremendous brain for life support, according to McCoy. Let's once again go through all those script references and try and make a coherent sense of what we are reading or seeing. Putting the mating cycle to one side, it's clear the Vulcans place a lot of effort into control of their own minds, which gives them the ability to heal themselves, disregard pain, not sleep for weeks, and so on. It's possible the greatest stamina and strength is due to this unusual level of control, as the Romulans do not seem to have anywhere near the same abilities, at least in the original series. Perhaps even the lifespan is affected by their greater level of mind control. So, if so, perhaps Surak gained in power on Vulcan because he displayed all these benefits as a byproduct of his philosophy, and it was a very attractive byproduct to many Vulcans. We do know from one episode that biologically the difference between Vulcans and Romulans is minimal. However, there is a biological difference. But as the Romulans show no evidence of long lifespans, greater stamina, mind control and so on, that is more likely a result of s3e27's philosophy, which is not a biological reason, because basically the difference between Vulcans and Romulans seemed quite extreme, and yet biologically there is only a minor difference. There's got to be something else there, and the only major difference is s3e27's philosophy of logic, mind control and pacifism. This could explain why s3e27's philosophy of logic and pacifism won out against those who were violent on Vulcan. The logical Vulcans were simply able to outthink and outlast their violent brethren. s3e27 is a pivotal figure in Vulcan history, and I suspect understanding how his philosophy spread may give us some critical clues concerning the differences between the Romulans and Vulcans and why Vulcan history unfurled as it did later. We know s3e27 was a pacifist, but as we saw in the Savage Curtain, by itself, that has little hope of surviving as a philosophy by itself, much less growing. The concept of resorting to violence as a last resort is logical, which I think is the key to s3e27's philosophy. It's not a rejection of violence, only to use violence as a last resort. Assuming s3e27 was born in 200 AD, I feel he must have witnessed an act of emotion-fueled violence which left a deep scar on his psyche. s3e27 may have been driven to find a better way, and I feel his first objective was to develop a philosophy which allowed him to control his emotion, in that which he succeeded. This may have spread, as a Vulcan who was able to control his emotion represents an effective survival trait in a high-tech world. Remember, the world of s3e27 must have included spacecraft and high-tech, so the initial survival benefits that made emotional outbursts useful were no longer that useful, and in some ways was actually a negative factor in terms of survival. By controlling your emotions, s3e27 probably developed his logic focus, as once your mind is clear of the biology of emotion, pure thought may have arisen. I suspect some Vulcans already had this ability, as otherwise they would have not been able to develop technology, but the ability to control emotion would have enhanced this. Once s3e27's sect, or religious movement, or philosophical movement, had developed their twin philosophy of emotional control and logic, they would have gained a significant advantage against the emotion-fueled fools which populated Vulcan. This would have allowed his sect to grow. One possible offshoot of being able to control your emotions, which does require the ability to control your own biology in some ways, would have had a host of other beneficial effects. The ability to ignore pain, the ability to heal your body, and with sufficient development, most likely the ability to live longer. As an offshoot, it allowed the Vulcans to develop their mind build and telepathic abilities in addition. I believe when s3e27 was born, the lifespans of Vulcans were similar to Earth, possibly less due to the high level of violence. When s3e27 developed his philosophy, this allowed him to enhance his lifespan as well as increase his stamina and strength. This would have given s3e27's sect, or philosophic movement, an irresistible benefit that other Vulcans would have been very interested in. If a Vulcan wanted to be healthier, stronger and live longer, they needed to adopt s3e27's philosophy. That would have been irresistible. For those unable to master his techniques, they would have ensured their children, in turn, could have started training them at an early age. That way, at least their dependents could benefit from s3e27's philosophy. Eventually, Vulcan society would have mandated this training for all children. As for the whole pacifism area, it's always logical to avoid violence in order to achieve your aim. Even Sun Tse indicated the greatest victory was one which was achieved without bloodshed. If there's no alternative to violence, the Vulcans, or at least Spock, had no issues with resorting to violence, but as only a last resort. The classic example was in Balance of Terror, where once he discovered the Romulans were an offshoot of the Vulcan race, he suggested the Romulan ship had to be destroyed, otherwise the galaxy would be plunged into war. He went down the path of the less violence, or reduction of violence, but that required more violence up front. Logic. This is a critical difference from what we view as a classic pacifist, someone who believes everyone inside is a teddy bear, or is good, and as long as you are nice to them, they will be nice in return. The Vulcan pacifism is rooted in the hard reality of life, and when Vulcan logic determines that a peaceful approach would result in more violence downstream, they have no issue in acting with rapid and extreme violence upfront to avoid the violence downstream. As Spock said, the life of one is worth more than the life of many. Of course, the Romulans did not benefit from this philosophy of logic, which explains their different behaviour, although I suspect they were more moderate than the original violent Vulcans nonetheless. The only area Surik could not change was mating. He probably wisely left that one alone, although the result is Star Trek can't help itself but let us know about all the gory details of the Vulcan mating rituals. And so we come to an end of episode 27, my Star Trek The Original Series timeline analysis series of videos, in this case discussing Vulcan and the people of Vulcan, the Vulcans. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.